Hola, Team Bio. Okay, so today's screencast is on the topic of sex. And the big question we're going to be answering today is, why is sex worth it? And we already kind of talked about this, but I just want to cycle back to it because understanding sex is going to be really important for you in deriving a basic understanding of evolution. A lot of students have misconceptions about evolution that they don't even realize that they have, and we're going to be trying to kind of help fix those in the next few weeks. So, why is sex worth it? But not for you, because you're CHOAT students and that's not allowed. So, wait until after you graduate. Okay, so as you know, we've been talking about there are two types of reproduction. One is sexual, and one is asexual. And let's just briefly go back into the asexual form of reproduction. We've talked about this before, but as you recall from our discussion last week, asexual reproduction is more efficient. That says efficient, even if you can't read it. It's more efficient and it's faster. So it can happen more quickly. You can get a bigger population in a smaller amount of time with asexual reproduction than with sexual. And also, you don't need a partner, which is big. Which means you're not dependent on another organism in order to reproduce. So these are all the benefits of asexual reproduction, and then there's one item I'm going to put under here in a different color. So benefits are in black. I guess we would put downsides in red, but things that can be benefits in a certain situation, but also downsides in another situation, I'm going to put in blue. And so asexual reproduction produces genetically identical offspring. And the reason why I put that in blue is because sometimes it's good to produce genetically identical offspring. Imagine you are an organism that is perfectly suited to your environment. You don't want to change at all, because any change would make you not as fit in that environment. You really want to keep all those genes that work so well together under these set of conditions together. And asexual reproduction allows you to do that because every offspring is the genetic clone of the parent. However, in an environment that's constantly changing, it's not very good to be an asexual reproducer, because this means that the rate of change of the organism is dependent on mutation. And I'm going to write that in red here because that's a downside. So I'm going to write here, change as a triangle, change is limited by the rate of mutation. And by that I mean all genetic diversity within a population that's reproducing asexually is just brought in by mutation. So all change, that's just saying it the same way again. Okay, I think you get it. Okay, so that's asexual reproduction, the benefits, the downsides, and also the kind of benefit / downside depending on the circumstance. So we move that aside. So, how does this vary in sexual reproduction? Well, of course, all these benefits that are in asexual reproduction are downsides of sexual. So I'm not even going to write them again. I'm just going to do this and put here. So sexual reproduction is slower, it's less efficient, you need a partner, and it leads to unique individuals. And a big upside is that variation is basically infinite. And you'll see what I mean by that in a second. Okay, so I want to really stress here that the biggest upside of sexual reproduction is this variation piece. And sexual reproduction leads to always unique organisms being created. Your set of chromosomes, your sequence of DNA, has never been seen before in the universe, and after you pass away, your exact set of DNA will never be the same. It will never, you'll never see that again in another organism. You are completely and totally unique. Okay, so let's talk about why that is such a beneficial thing to have happen. So again, we said before that this genetically identical offspring was really good in an environment that was stable. If you're well suited to the environment, then you want to only be making more copies of yourself. But in an environment that's changing, it's good to have variation. So let's talk about a group of, let's say, these dot organisms. One is green, and the other is, maybe this dark brown color. Okay, so these two dots have offspring, and of all these offspring, there are many different dot babies that they have. They're all sorts of different colors. So we have here, and then another green one, and then a dark green one, then a yellow one, and then a black one. Okay, so here we have this beautiful little family tree. And so if these are the two parent dots, let's imagine these parent dots live in a forest. And so being a dark green dot or a brown dot is, as you can imagine, really good for camouflaging in this forest environment. And the reason that this forest exists is because it is really, it's an ancient forest, and the environment during that time has been old has been wet, not old. So it's been a wet environment, and this has allowed the growth of a lot of plants, and so being brown or green has been really good for camouflage. Okay, but these two dots have all these offspring with a variety of different phenotypes. We've got the red and brown and light green, yada yada yada. Well, you can imagine when these offspring grow up or mature, if it's still the same conditions, wet foresty conditions, then potentially these two organisms and maybe this black guy also have the most success in these conditions. But let's imagine there's a change in the environment, everything really dries out, and the forest burns down, and now, instead of an old growth forest left here, we have a desert with not two S's, just one S. That's desert. A desert with lots of sand and, let's say sand and red rock. Well, in this environment, this organism and this organism are most well suited to the environment. And so they go on to survive and reproduce the most. And now, in the next generation, we see many, 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 many more red and yellow dots, in which in the wet forest conditions, these guys would probably die, but because we had this change and now this environment is a desert, we see that they become most prevalent in the environment. Now, remember, with asexual reproduction, these two organisms would only be able to make more green and more brown dots and not this wide variety of dot colors. And so we wouldn't see these phenotypes if we were only reproducing asexually. So that's kind of a silly example, but I think you get the point, that when the environment is changing, it's good to be a sexual reproducer, because the variation that comes out of sexual reproduction is huge, and it gives more different phenotypes for evolution to basically act upon. Okay, this is a plenty long screencast. I hope that makes sense, and we'll be talking more about sex and evolution as these weeks continue. So that's it for now.